Yeah, come find me or Ashton afterwards and we can get you checked in. But anyway, that's the heart behind that. So it's also, like I said, it's in the lobby. But hey, welcome. Glad y'all are here. My name is Chris. I'm the college pastor, and I freaking love my job a lot. And I love y'all a lot. And if I haven't met you yet, thank you. If I have not met you yet, I would genuinely love to meet you and get to know you. So please come say hi, introduce yourself. Not right now. That's super distracting, Riley. But come say hi after service. I should have clarified. Come say hi after service. I would love to meet you after service. There we go. Okay, I think that's clear. Hey, we are kicking off a new series tonight. It is called Did God Really Say? ? And so if this is your first time or maybe second time or 100th time, you picked a great time to be here because it is week 1 of this series. And over the next several weeks, we're going to be spending some time talking through how to determine what is reliable and true, because I think sometimes we have this question, did God really say that? Like, I hear people say that God said that, but did God really say that? To get started, though, I would like to do story time with Shep. Are y'all okay with that? Great. Okay. So I want you to imagine with me for a second. It is just after sundown, October 30th, 1938. I know. I was not alive, despite what y'all may believe. I am old. I am not that old. I was not alive. October 30th, 1938, and aliens have invaded America. Yes. Okay, so the first wave landed in an unsuspecting farming village known as Grover's Mill, New Jersey. It's just a stone's throw from Manhattan. And soon after the first wave of aliens landed, some local reporters show up on the scene, and they begin broadcasting live on radio as this is happening. And I want to read you a transcript. This actually went out over the airwaves 1938, October 30th. I want to read you a little bit of this transcript. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. I can see peering out of that black hole 2 luminous discs. Are they eyes? It might be a face. That face, ladies and gentlemen, it is indescribable. Oh my. There is a jet stream of flame springing from the creature. It is leaping right at the advancing men. It is striking them head on. Good Lord. They are turning into flame. Now the whole field has caught fire. The woods, the barns, the gas tanks of automobiles. It is spreading everywhere. It is coming this way. And at this point, voice goes away, radio silence, and there's this eerie hiss of static. About 6 seconds go by, and then all of a sudden, the signal comes back, and there are new reports of aliens in Chicago, in St. Louis, and beyond. As you can imagine, people who heard this are freaking out. They hear this on the radio, and they are like, oh my gosh, people are like running from their homes seeking shelter. They are going and finding like any safe place they think they can find. There are reports of women going into labor early because they are stressing out. People committed suicide after hearing this radio broadcast. There's looting and riots in the streets. It's like pandemonium and chaos. Now, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you don't. But this actually happened. Part of this actually happened. Maybe not the alien part. So you may know this story, but there is a screenwriter named Orson Welles, right? And he directed the Mercury Theater on Air. And he hired some voice actors to do a production of The War of the Worlds. And so he puts this out live on the radio, and there's a disclaimer at the beginning saying, hey, this is just a story. This is just entertainment. But a lot of people didn't hear that disclaimer, and they tuned in about 15 minutes late because there was another more popular radio show that ended about 15 minutes into Orson Welles' radio show. So they missed the disclaimer at the beginning. They hear all of these reports, and they believe that it's real, and people actually did those things based on what they heard on the radio. Now, you and I would think, come on, like that's ridiculous. There's no way that I would fall for that today, right? Right? Except we fall for stuff all the time, don't we? Right? Has anybody ever seen TikTok and you were convinced that it was true because it had millions of views and everybody was talking about it, only to find out later that it was fake? It wasn't even real? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, okay, I see some hands. I'm like, I know I'm not the only one. I was sitting there watching the Olympics with my family on the couch, and I am scrolling through Twitter because I refuse to call it X, and I am scrolling through Twitter, and I see this tweet, or whatever they're called now, saying that Simone Biles is pregnant. And why would I not believe that, right? And so I just say, oh, that's interesting. And so I tell my wife, and she's like, wow, that's impressive. She's winning a gold medal while she's pregnant. Only to find out like 2 weeks later, not pregnant. Right? Like, not a big deal, but like we believe stuff all the time because somebody we trust tells us, and so it must be true. We're presented with information all the time, and so it is really hard sometimes to determine what is actually reliable and true. But what if there was a filter? What if there was a way for us to begin to discern not just like fake news, but like real truth? What is really reliable? A lot of our conversation over the next few weeks is going to come from content from a book by John Mark Comer called Live No Lies. I was going to have it on my stand, but I ran out of room. Live No Lies. And this book is a conversation, and he talks a lot about this not conflict, but intersection between culture and God. And so this is going to inform a lot of our conversation over the next few weeks because it's so important that we begin to understand how we can know what we can trust, what's reliable and what's true. And so to do this, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning and look at a really older than me, ancient story that's going to help inform what is true and reliable. And I think it's going to help us over the next few weeks begin to find answers to questions like, who is God? I think this is maybe one of the most important questions that you can ever ask and then answer. And if you've been around 242 at all, you've heard this quote because I love it. But if you haven't heard it, there is a theologian named A.W. Tozer, and he says this: what comes into our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What comes into our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And so the answer to questions like who is God is profoundly important. We've all fallen, you didn't all raise your hand, but we've all fallen at some point into the trap of misinformation. What is true? What isn't? Can I believe what this person is telling me? Can I believe what I see on my phone or I hear on the news or a conversation in passing? Like, what is true? What isn't? And that's just for like surface level stuff. And it gets much deeper. We still have to wrestle with this idea of what do we believe? Where do we find truth? And so just like people with Orson Welles, they had to decide in that moment, is this true? Now, I am not standing up here trying to tell you that I am the arbiter of truth, okay? Like, I am not saying I'm the ultimate authority, and so I get it if you're a bit skeptical as we step into this conversation about truth and reality. I share that caution with you, but I want to encourage you over the next few weeks, and specifically tonight, to like lean in and think critically. So we're going to start at the very beginning in the book of Genesis. This is the first book of the Bible, and what we see in Genesis 1 and 2 is God creating the heavens and the earth, right? He creates everything in existence, and I believe what we see is the origin story of the world and humanity. Now, I'm going to write a few things on the board as we go. I'll tell you what they are because my handwriting is terrible, and I am not an artist, but I just wanted to do it. Many of you know this, but what we see in the story of Genesis 1 and 2 is a story about Adam and Eve, right? These are the two characters that show up at the beginning of the story. And here, I get this. I hear this objection often. Chris, isn't Genesis just a fairy tale or like a legend? Here's what I can tell you and what I'm going to try and show you tonight. I believe that what we see in Genesis is actually the truest story ever told. And immediately when I say that, some of you are like, there's a talking snake. Snakes don't talk. So how can you say it's the truest story ever told? I want you to hang with me. And maybe you've never thought critically about this before. And maybe already you're like, wait, was I supposed to think maybe it was a fairy tale? Like I never thought about that before. Let's think critically as we walk through this. And let's try and find what is true and reliable. But let's do it with an open mind. Because when we begin to ask those types of questions, it opens up to lots of other questions, right? Like, is it accurate? Is it a historical account of what actually happened? Is it mythological? Is it metaphorical? And ultimately, a lot of those questions focus on what is the genre of Genesis. Lots of literature falls into lots of different genres. We all have opinions on genres that we like. I think poetry is trash, okay? If you write poetry, no offense, but I don't like poetry. There's books of the Bible that are poetry. I think everything outside of books of the Bible that are poetry, that is poetry, is trash, okay? Not a big fan of Shakespeare. Romance novels, is that even literature? So I'm going way off script here. But we all have different preferences when it comes to genres that we read, genres that we enjoy. But this is important. What makes literature valuable is not the genre that it comes from. What makes it valuable is its meaning. Okay? So what makes Genesis valuable is not its genre, but its meaning. Genesis was written to a very specific people. It was written to the Israelites, and I'm gonna try and draw this for you. Let's change colors. Now, my art really consists of stick figures. Okay, so show me some grace. But let's see if this works. Oh, somebody knows what it is. Look at that. I practiced. Okay, I practiced. Yeah. Okay, so that's a book. And if you don't see it, ask your neighbor. Okay, so this is a book. This represents the story. Okay, Genesis is written. It's a story written to a very specific group of people, the Israelites. And the Israelites are coming out of slavery in Egypt when Genesis is written. Maybe you didn't know this. Genesis was not written as things happened. Okay, Moses goes back and writes Genesis after things happened. So Genesis is written to the Israelites. They're coming out of Egypt, out of slavery, and they have been pleading with God and begging with God to rescue them. And so when we look at the account from Genesis, it's not trying to unpack how things happened. Catch this. Genesis' main focus is not to unpack how things happened. The emphasis speaking to the Israelites is very specific. It is to remind them who is behind it all. It's to remind them of a creator that actually was involved in the whole process of what they have walked through. And so it's designed to reintroduce the Israelites really to two things: to reintroduce them to their creator, and then to remind them of his ultimate authority. There we go. If I misspell something, I'm sorry. It's not like I was a journalism major. But it's to reestablish his status as creator, to remind them, and then to reestablish his ultimate authority. Because there's a lot of history that's happened. There's a lot of stuff that the Israelites have walked through, and they have felt abandoned. They have been in Egypt in slavery, and they've been pleading with God to rescue them. And so as Moses sits down to write Genesis, he is not trying to get all of the details specifically about how it happened. He's trying to remind them of who and reestablish that God is creator and he has ultimate authority. Because after creating Adam and Eve, God gives them really two objectives, okay? He says, hey, here are the two things that I want you to focus on: dominion and multiplication. He's giving them a purpose and a pleasure. Your purpose is dominion. I want you to rule over the world, rule over creation, all of the animals and the birds and the fish in the sea and all that stuff, right? Go back and read the account. You're going to give them names, and you're going to be a botanist, and you're going to do all this stuff. Dominion, you are going to rule. But then inside of that purpose of ruling over the world, he also gives them a pleasure. The pleasure is multiplication that comes through intimacy. And that shows how to have pleasure within that purpose. Inside the context of that, Adam and Eve get one rule from God. At this point in the story, there's only one rule. Let's go read what that rule is. Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. This is God talking. He says, you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die. That's it. That's the one rule. As God puts them there, he says dominion, multiplication. I want you to focus on those two things, and I just have one rule. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And right after this conversation, we are introduced to a new character. It's our little talking snake, okay? And so this character is the enemy to God's creation. Now we're going to go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals that the Lord had made. This word crafty could be translated as more subtle, more cunning, more deceptive. Continues on. He said to the woman, did God really say? There it is. There's that first time that question is posed. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? You see this craftiness? Like if you're paying attention, God gave him one rule. Don't eat from this one tree. And immediately, this crafty serpent comes in and says, hey, did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? But Eve wasn't misinformed. She heard from God directly. And so she responds as someone who knows the truth. She responds and says, well, we're going to get to that in a second. As we look at this interaction, I don't want to get ahead of myself. As we look at this interaction between the serpent and Eve, we're going to see three different ways that the enemy tries to come at Eve. And I think we're going to see three different ways that he tries to come at us first. Here's his first way, okay? Even just now, as he asks this question, did God really say? He is inserting a deceptive idea. A deceptive idea enters into the story because he wants her to start questioning. He wants her to start thinking, and immediately as soon as he asks this question, hey, did God really say this? It takes root in her heart, right? Even though she heard from God himself and she responds to his question as someone who knows truth, we're going to start to see how things start to change. So this is verse 2 and 3 of Genesis chapter 3. The woman, this is Eve, said to the serpent, the enemy, no, we may eat from fruit from the trees in the garden. Right? She's already correcting him. You said, did God say you can't eat from any of the trees? No. God said we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. But God did say that you must not eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden. We are on track. Like, you're nailing it, Eve. You are repeating exactly what God said. And you must not touch it or you will die. That's not what God said, right? And so we start out so good. Eve knows the truth. She speaks the truth, but then it goes off the rails. And this is where we see this deceptive idea starting to take root in Eve's heart. And it is subtle, but this negative progression shows up in the way that Eve begins to think because this idea has been planted, beginning to question, did God really say? Like, do you remember? Do you know? Were you paying attention to what God really said? Like, can you trust him? And so this deceptive idea starts to change the way that Eve thinks about it. And the enemy immediately sees an opportunity. He comes in with another thought. This is chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. This is the serpent talking. You will not certainly die, the serpent said to the woman. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is more deception thrown at Eve, but this is so subtle, and it happens the same way to you and I because what the serpent says is mostly true. Most of what he says to her is true. Often the most difficult lies to interpret are wrapped in truth, and that's exactly what we see because, the enemy says, hey, you won't certainly die, which, that's kind of true, right? If you know the story, and we're not going to get all the way into it, but if you know the story, she eats the apple, and she doesn't die immediately, so I guess technically what he said is true. But by eating the apple, it leads to death later on. It wasn't God's original design. The next thing he says is, hey, your eyes are going to be open. Well, technically, she could already see. Eve wasn't blind, right? But her eyes were open. Her eyes were open to shame. Her eyes were open to her own nakedness that she had never seen before. And so, again, what he's saying is like kind of true. And then he finishes by saying, hey, you're going to know the difference between good and evil. Again, somewhat true. Up to this point in the story where we're at, all Adam and Eve have known is good. This is when evil gets introduced into the story. And so by them making a decision that prioritizes themselves and their desires over God and his desire for them, it introduces evil into the story, and so they begin to know the difference between good and evil simply by what they experience. And so the deception is super, super subtle. But check this out. We're going to look at this verse again, but we're going to go to the next slide, and it's going to have different words highlighted. You will not certainly die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now the enemy is playing into her human nature. Our desire, my desire, is to be like God, and that is not a bad thing. We were made in the image of God, to be an icon of the Creator, to reflect His glory, to reflect His beauty. So it's actually wired into us to want to be like God, but the enemy distorts it because there's this deceptive idea that's floating out there, and that deceptive idea now leads to a distorted desire. We have this deceptive idea that leads to a distorted desire because he plays into her desire to bear God's image. It's wired into us to have relationship, to be known, to bear the image of our Creator. Like, we still see this today. We desire intimacy. You desire intimacy in some capacity, whether romantic or not. But we get told that we should play the field, that we should try different options, but at the end of the day, intimacy is found in exclusivity. Intimacy is found one-on-one, and so there's this like subtle deception that says, hey, this is how you can find what you're actually looking for, but when we begin to chase that thing, it's taking us in the exact opposite direction of what God actually designed for us. There's this deceptive idea that plays on our desires, and all of a sudden our desires become distorted. And so watch what happens next, Genesis 6. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and she ate it. This is the moment when Eve buys into the misinformation. This is the moment where she took some of the fruit because she saw that it was good in her own eyes. Her desire for the fruit, her desire for something that was pleasing to her, overrode what God said to her. It overrode what God said that, hey, I got one thing that I want you to avoid. But in this moment, she let her own desires trump that. And we see something we want and we let it speak for us instead of letting God speak for us. We do this all the time. And what happens is we have deceptive idea that leads to distorted desire. And ultimately, we end up with destructive behavior. I thought I was going to be able to talk and write at the same time. Not true. I'm too worried about misspelling a word. Destructive behavior. Eve did the thing that she was told not to do. We do things that we know we shouldn't do all the time. And this strategy that was used against Eve is the same strategy that is used against me and against you. And it's subtle. It's attack on our mind and on our thoughts. And as Tozer says, what comes to mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So it makes sense that this is where the enemy would attack us and what we think about God and if we believe what God actually says about us. Right here in the middle, when these things overlap, this is ultimately where the enemy loves to live. Up here between idea and desire, you have temptation, right? Because we have ideas, we have something that we want, right? We have this idea, or we have a desire, and this idea, and they conflict with each other, and there's this temptation. It's like, oh, should we do it, right? Because we have this deceptive idea, this distorted desire. I'm not sure what I should do, and that's where temptation lives. Down here between ideas and behavior, this is education, because we have this idea, we act on it, we learn from it, whether good or bad. But based on the behavior, all of a sudden, we're educated now because we had this idea and then we acted on it. And then over here, between desire and behavior, this is compulsion. See, I told you can't spell. This is compulsion because we just have this desire and we just act. It's just based on our emotions. We don't think about it. We don't consider the cost. We don't consider the implications. We just see it. We want it, and so we do it. But right here in the middle, this is where the enemy lives because he has a plan. John 10:10 says this: the enemy came to steal and to kill and to destroy. That's his plan. That's his goal, to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That's what happened to Eve, and that's what he's trying to do to you and to me. And it leads to the question, where did everything go wrong? What happened? We just read the story, but how did everything get so off track? It started with a subtle deception, and it really was not an attack on what God said they could and couldn't do. The enemy wasn't coming at her and saying, like, hey, God was wrong for telling you this thing. He wasn't attacking what God said they could and couldn't do. He was attacking whether or not Eve believed in God's ultimate authority. That's what we begin to question when we ask these things. We are questioning God's ultimate authority. It's so important for you and I because when we question God's ultimate authority, we lose track of where truth comes from in the first place. We have to have some kind of foundation, some kind of basis for us to be able to decide what's reliable, what is true. And when we question God's ultimate authority, all of that is kind of up in the air. And so what do? It starts with us defining what truth is. In this book, Live No Lies, John Mark Comer kind of defines it like this. Truth is reality. Okay, and so the antonym of that, lies would be unreality. Truth is reality, lies are unreality. Truth is what's physical, tangible, real. Those are the things that are like our reality. And so unreality would be the opposite of that. But here's the crazy thing about humans. We have the capacity to hold reality and unreality in our mind at the exact same time. We can imagine what could be and then make it come to be. Unreality, reality. Here's an example of that. Think about 120 years ago, if you walked around and said, I believe humans are going to fly all over the planet. People would look at you and say, you're crazy. They might even lock you up for a while because they think you have lost it. And then along come the Wright brothers, and they too believe that humans can fly, and all of a sudden there's this thing called an airplane, and the Wright brothers are flying it, and now we don't think twice about the idea that humans can fly. Obviously, humans don't have wings, but they can still fly, right? It was something that didn't exist, but we held it in our mind, even though it was an unreality, and we made it exist. Unreality becomes reality. And Comer says this in his book about why this is so dangerous. Our capacity to hold reality in our minds is our genius, but it's also our Achilles heel. Because not only can we imagine unreality, but we can also come to believe in it. We can put our faith in ideas that are untrue or worse, that are lies. One of the easiest ways that we see this is in politics. Not going there. But think about it for just a second. Both sides believe with all of their heart that what they think is right and wrong is what's right and wrong, right? But when you take subjective opinion and you present it as objective truth, that's dangerous. And we lose the foundation of what truth actually is. And we start to think that we get to create truth for ourselves because we think that it comes from within us. And so we're about to wrap this up. But as we do, I want to ask a couple of questions. First, this is what you and I have to wrestle with. And you may not get this answer tonight, but you have to wrestle with this. Who is the ultimate authority regarding what is true in your life? Think about that. Who's the ultimate authority? What is the ultimate authority? Who determines your truth? Who gets a voice when it comes to the most important things in your life? What filter do you run your deepest desires through? Because we all have had a moment or will have a moment where we begin to question if we can really believe what God says. We have to wrestle with, does God really have my best interest in mind? Does God really love me? Does he still love me after what I did last weekend, last month, last year? I know what God said. It seems clear, but is that what he actually meant? Maybe he meant something completely different. How do I know that God actually has my best interest in mind? And we have all these questions, and it's in the moment of these questions. Questions are not bad. God can handle our questions, but it's in the moments of these questions that if we're not careful, the deceptive ideas come into play. That's where the enemy's trying to attack us. And so I am not standing up here saying, don't question. I want you to know that questions are healthy. You should wrestle with these things. But it's in these moments that you have to have a filter that you run things through to decide what is true. Because we see in John 10:10 what the enemy's plan is, to steal and kill and destroy. But you know what God's plan for us is? That we would have life and have it to the full. That's God's desire for us. That's what he said. God really did say, I came that you would have life and have it to the full. And so even though Eve questioned and started to doubt what God actually wanted for her, that may seem like it's an old trick, but it's the same trick that the enemy continues to use on you and me today to begin to question, is God really good? Who is God in the first place? Ignatius of Loyola is a 16th century theologian, and he says this about sin. Check this out. Sin, the unwillingness to trust that what God wants for me is only my deepest happiness. I'm going to read that again. The unwillingness to trust that what God wants for me is only my deepest happiness. He's not saying that what God wants for us is for us to pursue what we believe will make us happy. He's saying that what God desires for us is what leads to our deepest happiness. And so when we begin to distrust that God actually has a plan, has a desire, and that plan and desire leads to our deepest happiness, that's when sin enters the picture. And that's exactly what we saw with Eve. She began to question, she began to doubt. Doubts are okay. Doubts are okay. But we have to recognize what's coming, and we have to have some form of truth. Here's why I think that this story is so important. You know what the word Adam means? Human. You know what Eve means? Life. Look it up. I didn't make that up. This is the story of human life. The story of creation that we see, the story that is given to us in Genesis, is God painting a picture for us, whether you believe that it is exactly accurate or it's an allegory or whatever you believe about it. I'd love to have that conversation with you. But it is the story of human life, and there is a creator who has ultimate authority, who has given up everything for relationship with you and relationship with me. And he's okay with your questions, he's okay with your doubts, but we have to have a foundation and a basis for truth. And so here, I'm wrapping it up. This is it. This is the end. Last question. Not only who has ultimate authority when it comes to what is true, but who is God? Because as Tozer said, what comes into our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And so ultimately, it's not just a question of who is God, who is your God? What started as a healthy desire to be like God, to bear his image, so often gets distorted and expresses itself in us as wanting to be God. I'm not talking about being the God, but if we're not careful, we begin to believe that truth starts with us. That desire can come from within us, that we can pursue whatever we want, we can create our own truth, we can head in whatever direction we want, and we give ourselves ultimate authority. And so that would be you becoming your own God. And so you have to wrestle with this and come to your own conclusion of who is your God. Is it you? Is it someone else? Is it logic or reason, your feelings? Or is it your creator who has an ultimate design and desire for you? Who is your God, really? Let's pray. God, thank you that we get to come into this place and we get to go way back and see this ancient story that has been preserved for us to give us a glimpse into human life, to give us a glimpse into humanity and how it started and your design, your desire for relationship, for communion. God, how you have invited us into dominion and multiplication. God, something got off. And sin, separation, darkness entered into the picture. The beautiful thing is, God, even in the midst of all of that, you continue to make a way. And so, God, I pray that tonight, and also as we move forward over the next several weeks, God, we would begin to be honest and think about, man, where do I land on who is my God? Where do I define, what do I use to define truth and reliability? Is it you, Is it what you have said? What your desire is for me? God, I chase my own desires all the time. And I let them trump what you have asked of me, because at the end of the day, I forget that what you want most for me leads to my ultimate happiness. God, help us to trust you. God, help us to put you back in the place of ultimate authority. God, help us to begin to process and sit in this space where we understand, God, you are not just some police officer up in the sky who is trying to catch us doing something wrong, but you actually desire that we would have life and have it to the full. God, help us to experience that fullness this semester, that fullness in community, that fullness in your presence, that fullness even in our school and with our roommates and at work. God, help us to experience the fullness of life that you offer for us. God, we love you so much. We thank you for your love for us. It's in your awesome name we pray.